Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your host, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to another episode of Election University Podcast. I'm Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
And thanks so much for joining us today. We are very excited for today's episode. We are hopping on a plane, going across the pond. We're landing in Ireland today to talk to Brendan Tobin of ECanvasser.com.
Cool.
Yeah.
Tell us more about ECanvasser.
Yeah, ECanvasser is an online platform, a tool that you can use, an app on your phone that helps folks who are doing canvassing work, so doorbelling, going door to door, connecting with voters, and collecting that data. I think you and I are most familiar with a product called Minivan,
right,
which is a product of the NGP van, the Voter Action Network. Democrats typically across the country partner with their state parties to provide a voter file list, and Minivan and NGP are the product of that partnership with the state parties. So we're talking with Brendan today of ECanvasser.com about an alternate tool that folks can use.
Brendan Tobin is the head of growth at ECanvasser and has just a wealth of knowledge in digital marketing. He's been doing it for much of his career. So my expectations are high that he is going to market this product to us pretty hard.
He knows his stuff.
He knows his stuff.
He knows how to sell a steak, that sizzle on that steak.
So hopefully, in addition to talking to him about ECanvasser, maybe we can also hear about the
recent referendum.
Referendum
absolutely.
In Ireland.
Yeah, the repeal of Amendment 8. So we're coming right off the heels of a very big win for the folks who are advocates of abortion rights and part of the pro-choice movement. Their Amendment 8, was a ban on abortion, and they repealed it with an overwhelming majority, almost a super majority. It's fantastic.
So great.
So hopefully we'll be able to talk a bit with them about that and the role that they may have played in that election. So very excited. And also, I'm wearing my Ireland shirt today because, as anybody who knows me knows, I am Irish. I have freckles all over my body. My great-grandparents are from the motherland, from Belfast specifically, and I'm very excited to talk to my brethren.
Hooray.
Yes,
Yay.
This is super fun. So for me, this is going to be just the total complete package, talking politics with the motherland. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We're going to get right into the interview. We talked a bit about your resume and the work that ECanvasser does and what it can do for campaigns, but we'd love to hear more about how you got involved in politics from the experience that you have doing digital marketing, and a little bit more about ECanvasser.
Sure. Thanks very much. I suppose I would describe my coming to the political campaigning industry as kind of a bit like Alice falling through the hole. Really, I would say that initially that I would always work in a software company, but we just happen to do political software. So usually people kind of turn off when I say, "Oh, you work in software," but then when they hear it's political software, it becomes far more interesting. I think certainly I worked in software for a number of years, and a lot of what we do here is very similar to what, say, I would have done in my last company, where we provided online orientations for health and safety professionals, in heavy industries like oil and gas and construction. And a lot of the same challenges are really there. It's about trying to provide a product that really fits the challenges that they're experiencing. And so when I happened to move city, my family, and when I moved back to Cork, a job opened up with ECanvasser. I certainly had kind of a lot of political interest, but I didn't have any background in political campaigning. I wasn't a party member or anything like that. So it was very much a new industry to me. But like I say, a lot of the challenges I would have had before were the same sort of challenges we were looking at with ECanvasser. And so, coming into it first, it was certainly a very raw company. When I joined in 2015, mid-2015, the product developed to a certain extent, but we were really only scratching at the surface of the type of functionality that was needed to really be selling properly internationally. And challenge for me initially was to try and, take stock of what was needed and to start addressing that not only from a marketing and growth point of view, but also product development and all the other elements that you need in order to kind of have a functioning company.
That's great. So what was the vision behind ECanvasser and what does it do?
Okay. So our CEO, Brendan Tobin, was much more kind of embedded with political campaigning. He grew up campaigning for a political party here. And I suppose his experience on the doorsteps and particularly maybe losing information or not having a really good experience with data capture in the field was the thing that initially drove him to, when he was in university doing business information systems, to kind of go, maybe I can do this a little bit better. And that hubris led to the university project, which ultimately led to going into an incubator within University College Cork. It's called the Ignite program. And from that, he got a lot of encouragement. He happened to come out very successfully out of that incubator, gained angel investment from somebody who had operated in the political industry and knew this type of product was desperately needed. Certainly in the US, there was a proven market there, but in Europe, that there was a massive opportunity to try and develop something political technology-wise that wasn't, a market that wasn't being serviced by any of the American products up until then.
Interesting. So things in the United States are pretty hyper-partisan right now. Right. That's maybe an understatement. And things in Ireland have certainly garnered a lot of attention recently. The gay marriage vote that you've taken and the repeal of Amendment 8 for abortion rights. What's the climate like in Ireland right now? Is it as hyper-partisan as things in the United States right now? And how are you navigating those landmines, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I suppose we've kind of had a taste of what partisan politics looks and feels like over the last few weeks and months with this referendum, because it's been hugely divisive. As you can imagine, anytime abortion is on the ticket for a referendum or otherwise, it becomes very heated. But generally speaking, like anywhere in Europe, you'd find that plurality of politics is much more the norm, and that type of kind of, very sort of toxic partisan atmosphere doesn't really exist at the same level. More like just at election time you might get that. So the referendum has been really interesting. Certainly, I think the referendum result, which was essentially a landslide for the repeal movement, which was to introduce abortion as a healthcare right for all people in this country up to 12 weeks. And beyond that for medical necessity. So I think that's really a reflection, the result has been a reflection of where Ireland really is now at this stage. It is quite a liberal country. There's certainly old traditional elements within the country, but generally speaking, you look at Dublin, it has the look and feel of Brussels or Paris or London, and, the kind of constitution that we have is maybe not fit for purpose anymore. It's quite an old document. It was written back in the 1920s. And, it's something that needs to be updated. And I think this movement, along with the gay marriage referendum, is, as our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, described, a quiet revolution. And what we're getting now is the Irish people beginning to get a constitution that reflects the reality of where we're actually at.
So how does ECanvasser fit into that? Like, are you leaning partisan? Are you picking sides when you're pitching your product, or how nonpartisan are you?
Completely. We would certainly, like, one of the guiding principles of the company, and our CEO would have always said this, was making, elections, making politics and making democracy more affordable for everybody, so that everybody should be allowed to take part. So we really stick to our principles of nonpartisanship. There's nobody that we would say no to unless we felt that they were doing something illegal. And so for that reason, and certainly with the Irish referendum, we're a young company, and when Love Both, which is the Save the Eight campaign, came to us and they were looking for a product, we were more than happy to offer our services to them. And I think they, were very well organised. They wanted a tool that could allow people who maybe never done digital canvassing or digital outreach before, something that was simple and was able to hit the ground running for them. And so we were really happy to work with them. Of course, we would have been really happy to work with the other side also, but as it happened, they had a very different style of campaigning, certainly in those initial stages of the campaign.
So does that mean that it's possible that in a campaign, both sides could be using your product at the same time? You don't conflict out?
No, we haven't had any conflict with that up until now. Sadly, maybe that we're operating on both sides, and that those individual parties raise an issue about that. But I think that may raise its head at some point, and we'll just have to negotiate that as we go. But I think we've always stuck to our non-partisan guns. There certainly is pressure, when you're talking to the big parties in the US. That's the first thing they ask. Who do you work with? Do you work with the other side? And that's something we just have to, stand our ground on and say that we're not willing to move on that particular issue. And I think, I'd almost describe the US system as like parallel oligarchies, where you've got these big players on both sides, and we can, I'm talking about VAN and maybe I360 would be the kind of the dominant players on each side, and they're hard to break past. And so what ECanvasser does is operates at the fringes to some extent. So we work local, state level, places that maybe VAN mightn't be on offer, and that we give really good quality tools, something that could rival what VAN, Organizer, or I360 are providing. But the people who may not have been able to either afford it or wouldn't have been provided to them up until then. So, there's that space that we can operate in. Parties like the Libertarians, Justice Dems, and people like that as well. I think there's a real need out there for technology that isn't, partisan in any way.
Yeah, we strive here to do the same. I mean, both Rainey and I are left of center. We describe Election University as a democratic yard with no fence and certainly no walls. We definitely won't be putting up walls, but anybody can come into the yard, and we've had speakers on here that represent both sides of the aisle, we call it. So both the Democratic and Republican Party. We've had guests on the show, and largely we're targeting our product for down ballot races that oftentimes are nonpartisan,
right? Because
we believe good governance does trickle down to the lowest elected positions. So we're right along there with you on that. What I'm curious about is when you have contentious issues like the marriage vote and abortion rights votes, how does it work with the staff? I mean, I looked online, you have a young staff. My guess is that they're probably divided on some of these more contentious social issues. How does that work?
To be honest, it hasn't really presented a problem. Like, for example, with the recent referendum, like I would be guessing, but I would say probably a huge majority in our office would probably have been with the repeal side in terms of how they voted. But, we're all quite practical people, and we believe in what the company is doing. We believe in the mission of bringing like good quality tools to everybody. And, if you believe in that, you have to understand that everybody has a right. And I think it is like, it's not nonsense to say that democracy is more important than the side you believe in, and I think there's a lot of validity in some arguments on the other side as well, and that they need to be presented clearly, because the last thing that you want is, like spin and fake news to kind of take over. So from that point of view, I don't think there was any real kickback. There was certainly no issue when we signed up with Love Both to provide them with tools, and we were very happy with what we were able to do for them. But you have to remember, we don't really provide anything above and beyond the software. So, how they use it. Consultancy work isn't something that we would provide as a standard. So, we wouldn't have been, really speaking with them hugely in terms of how they were laying out their campaign or advising them in that sense. So we're really kind of like tech providers, and then we step back unless they need kind of technical support with us.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the US, I think that there are certain vendors that don't get that sort of partisan scrutiny. I would say like print houses and mail houses. Anybody that does print work, prints the mailers and prints doorbell pieces and prints letterhead and all of that. And then mail houses who actually send out the mail are not really put through that level of scrutiny, I think. But as you move away from that, particularly in tech, it's been somewhat divisive, like Nation Builder, which provides websites and a bit of a CRM, customer relation management tool, contact relation. I can't remember what the C stands for. Yeah, this is a contact or customer. I can't remember.
It does data.
Yeah, it does data. It's a campaign database, essentially. Got blasted because after the election, they were boasting that they had worked with the Trump campaign, and the folks on the left of center side, the folks who do progressive political technology, felt really slighted by their bragging about that win. And there is a bit of a pressure to choose sides on some of this stuff. So I'm always fascinated to see how other organizations are navigating those waters, because I do think good governance shouldn't necessarily be partisan, and we should all be, able to step aside on that stuff.
I mean, we're an international company, so the US provides the majority of our clients, and probably always will. Maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. But our perspective would be that if we were partisan in the US, it would close off massive tracts of opportunity elsewhere. Sure. I think that's the thing. Like, we're one of the very, very few political technologies born and bred outside of the US. And we have a very different perspective. So, like, operating in 70 countries, yes, it's predominantly Europe and Anglo countries, and a smattering of others, but it does give you, like, the European perspective particularly. There's an absolutely massive opportunity there, but there's also a very different emphasis and a different focus and different pressures on us to build a product in different ways. So I think, we just, I certainly feel for Nation Builder. I think they've really stuck to their guns over the years, and you do have to, brag about the big wins that you have, and I'd never, denigrate them for that. But it's just, it's the nature of the landscape that they operate in, and unfortunately, it's always probably going to be that way. Well, certainly for the foreseeable future, anyway. So I think we'd be happy to have that problem. It's a sign that they're doing really well.
Yeah, let's talk about the 70 countries that you're working in, and talk a bit about some of the recent successes that you've had in the U.S. that folks might be familiar with, if there are any under your non-disclosure agreements that you're able to talk about. But then I also want to talk about some folks who may have signed up for more international types of software or program or tools, are probably getting slammed in the last few weeks over GDPR policy and privacy upgrades and notices. So I want to talk a bit about this, since you're located outside the US and most campaigns, are US based and using US vendors. Folks probably don't have a lot of familiarity with what GDPR is.
What does that stand for?
Sure.
Yeah. And so if you could,
what is that?
GDPR is, it's the General Data Protection Regulation. So it's like they took all the data protection regulations of the past 20 or 30 years, and then they put them all together, made them stronger, and then they slapped these massive fines on top for anybody who breaks the law. And so that's been enacted only within the EU. So the 28 countries of the EU, still including Britain. So where it affects international organizations, and I don't think it really affects the US political industry as such. It affects the US political consultants who happen to operate internationally. Those are the guys who actually need to be concerned about this. But for Democrats and anybody who's really running for office in the US, it probably is more something that they need to kind of look at and wonder, how come we're getting so out of step with the international community about this, because voter data is treated in a totally different way in the US. But anyway, I digress. To go back to it, what GDPR really instills is this kind of sense that your voter data is essentially like your money, and that if you hold voter data, that you need to treat it like you hold somebody's money. So you need to hold it in a secure fashion. It needs to be transparent what you have and why you have it and what you're doing with it. And you need to be able to answer to any individual citizen or voter about what you have and respond to them really quickly. Otherwise, you're going to be hit with fines of up to 20 million euros, or 4% of global GDP or turnover. But that really kind of affects more companies than political parties. So from our perspective, we've been putting in place a huge amount of security protocols, making sure that our house is in order, so that when a European organisation or political party comes to us, that we can provide them with a very secure setup that gives them the best possible start in terms of providing that data security for their voters.
So the question that I have, I think that would be the obvious follow-up to that is, so for organizations like yours that are operating in the United States, MailChimp, who might be a U.S. company but has international, certainly EU clients, Nation Builder, any of these tools that might be used outside of the U.S., are you providing two tiers of protection then? One for EU countries and political campaigns and another set for the United States? So we don't get to benefit necessarily from the GDPR rules and regulations?
No, we've rolled it out internationally. I think we haven't actually put it on the US servers just yet, because there isn't a huge amount of demand, but it'll be going up in the next week or so. We would feel that if political parties or politicians want to really take this very seriously and adhere to the same sort of regulations that are here in Europe, then we'd be more than happy to facilitate that for them. But I do think that this is something that Canada is watching, for example, very closely, and I think they will follow suit. Australia and New Zealand likewise. It's good to see Europe leading the way. The EU is much maligned, but a lot of the legislation that they kind of force through international parliaments tends to be pretty good legislation. And I think this will change the game internationally for the way voter data. And I think in the wake of, Cambridge Analytica and that whole scandal, and it's really it's got people thinking, this isn't right, data is power, we all know that, and it shouldn't be used to manipulate us. And we want a more level playing field, and we want there to be, a situation where if we feel that our data is being misused, that we have somewhere to go and something will be done about it very quickly. And it scared the hell out of everybody, let's be honest.
Yeah, for sure. And which is why I ask the question, and may have a little bit of a follow-up here on it, because if I'm Jason Bennett, I'm running for Seattle City Council, for example, and I sign up for ECanvasser, will I automatically be protected under these GDPR, or do I have to elect into it?
So what we have built is like a privacy dashboard. So that's like a whole suite of settings that you would set up yourself at the beginning of your campaign. And that would allow you to say, for example, if you are capturing information about your voters, or if you're importing a database that has their voting history, you have to say, why do I have this voting history? This is the type of thing that European parties are now going to have to do. So anything like personally identifiable data-wise, they need to say why they have it and what they're going to do with it. And so, yes, if you signed up, you would have the opportunity, just the same as any European client, to have this system in place, and it'll be there as standard. So that would be our hope, is that people will start using it in the US, and it will kind of change the conversation a little bit.
So back to ECanvasser. Can you walk us through what some of the features are and maybe the different price points of what you can get?
Sure. So ECanvasser, like I say, started as this canvassing app, simple canvassing app for kind of going out to doors, capturing information in the field, and then having it fed back to a voter database. And like you said, Jason, it's essentially a voter CRM system. So what we've ended up kind of adding on as people request more features is we're kind of heading towards that nation builder space of being a full voter CRM system with a number of outreach tools, things like say, door-to-door canvassing app, field canvassing app where you're out in the community and you want to do some polling or surveying anonymously with people on the street. Also things like issue trackers, casework management for constituency management work, email marketing system. So like as we've been adding on and, like the product has really been developing and moving away from just a canvassing app and now becoming much more of a kind of a total solution for political people running for office and also for political parties. So it's certainly, I would describe it as kind of a couple of things. It's a voter CRM, it's outreach, it's analytics, and then it's also now providing this kind of layer of security or taking security really seriously and giving, separate setting systems so that parties and politicians can really amp that up. And it's been a really interesting journey putting that together, but it takes a lot of time. Like I say, I started in 2015, and we were only kind of becoming fit for purpose for the US market at the beginning of the 2016 cycle. So it's been certainly interesting in trying to develop the product so that it fits, all the way from local level like judgeships or school board elections all the way up to federal races. And then also, how do we operate in the Dominican Republic where they only want to use WhatsApp groups or they only have mobile devices, or what's it like when you're running a European election campaign across 28 states and 500 million voters. So we're being kind of pulled in lots of different directions, but I think what it's done is it's built a really interesting, flexible tool that's kind of affordable for lots of different people,
So does that mean that there are different levels of buy-in based on what you need it to do? Because what if you don't need an entire CRM, but you just want to use the walk tool?
Yeah, well, unfortunately with us, you're going to have to take all the features because we don't feature gate anything. So we've tried to make our whole model as simple, so that you should be able to understand it within a couple of seconds. So it's just based on the number of voters you put in. So up to 15,000 voters is $49 a month. There's a much cheaper version. The annual version is obviously discounted quite heavily to try and promote and get over that sort of short election cycle thing that is the real problem for us as a SaaS company and working in the political industry. So the first tier is $49. That's kind of entry level, pretty much affordable for anybody. And then it moves up to $99 for 15,000 to 50,000. So kind of like your standard state house race. And then there's a $299 model for a kind of a Fed race or a large state house or Senate race. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Above and beyond that, you've been brought all the way up to 200,000 voters at that point. So if you're above that, you kind of go into an enterprise type arrangement with us where we have to kind of go, look, how do you want to break this up? You're obviously going to be working multi-constituency. You're probably a statewide race or a national race here in Europe. And we kind of have to break it down with them a little bit more. But we don't feature gate anything. Everything is available. And we try to provide as much, concierge customer success for everybody. So if somebody comes in on a local race and they're like, I need help with my data file, or what's canvassing all about, we're going to entertain that and try and answer them as honestly as possible and help them along.
That's great. And so people have to bring their own data. They have to go to their county auditor or their elections department, their secretary of state. They have to purchase the data or bring data, depending on how you get your voter file, to you, and then you do the import for them, or they can import themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We couldn't possibly provide data, outside of, all these countries. So certainly it's just a software suite that allows people to use their data files as well as possible. And sorry, the second part of your question, Jason.
Oh, that was it. If they needed help importing the data, you can either, they can do it themselves or you can import it for them.
Sure. Yeah, so we've built like an import tool that's very simple to use, but if they do need assistance or if they don't kind of understand the correct setup for their voter files, we'll always take them through that and help them with that. So, we're certainly like very committed to making sure, in the same way that the price points are there to make it available to everybody, there's no point in just providing a tool with no support at the lower levels, because it's just, these things aren't that straightforward, and it's fine for people who've used tools like this before, but there's a lot of elements to it, and getting the setup correct at the start is really, really important. Like what we've seen is that if you can help people in that first couple of days and really get them set up correctly, that they hit the ground running, and that's a huge advantage to them. Otherwise, they're like coming back to us for weeks and weeks going, but how do I do this? How do I do that?
Like it's not cost efficient for anybody to not offer that up front.
Yeah, it should be a standard. But that's just something we believe in, and it's worked really well for us.
Cool.
That's great. So, what U.S. campaigns are you working on this year that you're excited about? If you can talk about them, or what U.S. campaigns have you worked on recently that folks might be familiar with that you are proud to boast about?
Yeah, so we've onboarded on average 100 new campaigns every month this year so far. So it's been really, really positive. So when you think about that, like 3-4 state house or local or up to Fed level races coming in every day and trying to onboard those people and respond to the challenges that they're facing is huge, and it's a big task. So that would be, I think, probably the biggest thing that I would personally be very proud of, that we're able to do that people buy in very quickly, and people tend to buy into the product once they visit the site, because I think it answers a lot of questions. There's no obfuscation. It's like the pricing is really clear, and I think people respond very positively to that. In terms of campaigns, we've been working with the Justice Dems, trying to, I will say, the sales cycle and kind of the buy-in cycle for the larger parties is, glacial in pace. So it can take years to really kind of get them to buy into the whole thing and to sell it internally. But yeah, the Justice Dems are like an example of that kind of around the edges of the partisan world, that they might be looking for something a bit more bespoke for them, and they've certainly been really interested in talking to us and start rolling it out and trialing it with various campaigns. There's a lot of Fed House races, a lot of state Senate stuff, but they tend to be kind of independents, or we've been working as well with the Libertarian Party, and at state level, but also nationally, they're beginning to kind of switch on to, actually, this is great because it provides all the tools that we need for all of our races, and it's not, tainted with partisanship or anything like that. So it's really good for them. It's a good fit for them, and I think we'd feel that we're going to grow during the course of this year to become a lot more brand awareness. It was a real struggle, I will say, in 2016, when the brand awareness wasn't out there. And now it's so much easier that people have maybe heard of it just kind of in the ether or word of mouth or whatever it is, that they kind of, believe in us a little bit more. And I think the product is certainly able to deliver that for them.
Do you have any features to ECanvasser that are in the pipeline that you want to tell us about? And where can people sign up?
Sure. So some really interesting stuff that we're working on at the moment is white labeling for campaigns. I think there's been a huge amount of interest in that. Like I say, we've just released our field app which is like for hotspot canvassing out in the field. And I think there's a huge amount of interest from polling companies and also larger campaigns in terms of, doing their own polling in that type of product. And I think the e-signature element that we've built in order to become GDPR compliant has huge potential ramifications for ballot initiatives and for petition drives in the initial stages of campaigning. So to be able to capture actual signatures on mobile devices and store them is just such a huge time saver for campaigns. So those are some really interesting things. We're also fleshing out our API structure so that we're able to kind of knit into a lot, like with a lot of the federal races, I will say, they oftentimes have their own systems. They might be using something like Salesforce or Nation Builder or HubSpot or any of these other tools that would be out there, and to be able to kind of just tie into those really quickly is a huge advantage. So that's why we're kind of by the end of this year going to have our API really up and running and very flexible for our campaigns. So it's pretty bright. The future is bright. It's really bright here in Europe. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. We've onboarded this huge campaign in India as well, the largest party in India. So as you can imagine, the figures for canvassers alone is like telephone book numbers. So it's really interesting to see what happens there. So there's a ton of stuff going on. Really exciting though.
Very cool. Again, that's ECanvasser.com. We can find folks on Instagram at ECanvasser app, on Facebook at Facebook/ECanvasser app. Brendan Tobin, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a good one. Listeners, thanks again for joining us. We will catch you next week. I'm Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.